G'day, ZiggyD here, and Path of Exile's patch 0.11.1e released yesterday, and it just had a few bug patches and some microtransactions and things like that with it, but it also contained 4 new unique items. Now, pretty much every time there's this new unique item release, there's this sort of hunting period for the few hours after the patch where people are, trying to hunt for these uniques, and it's always very exciting seeing them finally get posted in general chat or on the forums and things like that. And I look forward to that pretty much every week when it happens. And since this week's 4 uniques were pretty interesting, I thought I'd make a bit of a video covering the 4 different uniques, giving some of my opinions on them and just giving you guys an overview of what they're each about, because they're pretty interesting stuff. Now, in the background, I'm going to not so subtly advertise my new website, ZiggyD.tv, because it is up and working. Some of you guys might have seen from a recent video, and it has some cool guides and supplementary material to my other content that I produce here on YouTube and hopefully future on Twitch TV. So that'll be in the background, just for you guys to, just as a little reminder. But let's jump straight into the new uniques. First up, we have Auxium, the chain belt. Now, Auxium was created by a diamond supporter named Aux, or AUX, who plays a physical elemental wand witch. And you'll probably see as we go through the different mods on this particular unique, how that is the case. And it's pretty obvious looking at the unique, his motivation for creating this particular item. So, first things first, the Auxium chain belt is a level 70 unique. Now, this is obviously a big part of unique design. If you're going to make a very powerful unique that's kind of endgame, then you kind of have to put a high level restriction on it so that people can't just use it to level with. Now, level 70 is one of the highest I've seen so far. I can't actually think of any that are higher than that. And this also means that since it's a chain belt base item, which can drop, from level 1, you actually need to get a level 70 chain belt to be able to chance this item. So that means you can only get the Auxium, you can only get chain belts that drop from level 68 plus maps, so level 68 maps from rare mobs, and then level 69 from magic mobs, and then level 70 maps and beyond from normal mobs, if you want to chance this item. So it's going to be incredibly rare. Now, this item is super OP, and it kind of sets the theme for this week of best in slot uniques, because a lot of these uniques this week are best in slot items. So let's go straight into the stats. This has best in slot energy shield, basically. The 20 to maximum energy shield from your base implicit mod from the chain belt, and then you have a whopping 65 to maximum base energy shield from the actual mod roll here. Now, the highest base you can get on a rare belt is, I believe, if I can find this, it is 67. So this is an 85 total compared to 67, so that alone almost makes it a best in slot item, but you kind of need a few other stats and belts are pretty good utility things, so there needs to be some other good mods, which there does happen to be. The next one is it has a max elemental damage roll, very high elemental damage with weapons roll, which, as you can see from AUX's elemental / physical wonder build, elemental damage with weapons. This really suits that. And then next up we have 1% of physical attack damage leached as mana per power charge. Now, that is quite powerful, and it sounds ludicrously powerful, but it's only quite powerful. And that's because you are capped from the mana you can leech to 12.5% of your max mana per second. So even though you can get a potential 7% mana leech on physical damage with this belt, just from your power charges alone, that's a lot. But you are still capped at that 12.5% of your max mana. Now, if you have very high mana, that means you can leech a lot more, but just it's capped. There's some sort of cap on it at least. Like there's a minor drawback to that, basically. And then the next one, and this is by far the best stat here, which I don't know. I can actually box these just to draw extra highlighting to it. Chill and freeze duration on you is based on 65% of energy shield. This is a new mod, and we've never seen this before, and it's pretty interesting. Basically, what this means is, or actually, I should go to a bit of backstory. When you play a CI build or a energy shield focused build that doesn't stack any life, you are very susceptible to status ailments like freeze and shock and chill and all of that good stuff, including stun. Now, the reason this is because these things are calculated by comparing the damage done with that status ailment inflicting attack to your max life. Now, CI builds obviously have 1 life, so the calculation is always stacked against the player there. And you know, CI builds pretty much have to use the ring dream fragments, which cannot be frozen on it, to avoid freeze, especially because that's a very dangerous one. You know, you don't want to get frozen, and you're getting frozen all the time when you only have 1 max life. Now what this belt does is allows you to not have to worry about using that Dream Fragments ring, and that frees up a ring slot. Now that means you're getting this very powerful belt, and then you're getting an extra free ring slot, because Dream Fragments was only really there for that cannot be frozen. It's not a great slot item in that slot compared to like a really well-rolled rare that you could get. So using Auxium, you get to use this incredible belt with incredibly high ES, and you get to drop that Dream Fragments when you get to level 70. Now the drawbacks to this item are that, you know, it's high level 70, so you can only use it in the end game. It's hard to get from maps, so it's going to be very rare and very expensive. So that could be considered a drawback, but I don't know if it actually can be considered a drawback. It just means people that can get this item, it's going to be very, very powerful for them. And then probably the only other drawbacks is that it doesn't have any resists, which, you know, you can fill those up in other slots, so it's not a major one. But the final drawback that I wanted to touch on was, I believe, yes, Magic Find. It doesn't have any Magic Find stats, and often when you're getting to this very high level, unless you're, you know, planning to try and push to a level 100, and you're not going to be using best in slot items. Instead, you're going to be using Magic Find items if that's, you know, if that's your goal, and that's the goal of a lot of players that get to end game. So there's a bit of a trade-off there. You can have this very powerful item, but they won't have any Magic Find on it, and yeah, so there's a bit of a trade-off there, but still very much best in slot for a lot of energy shield based builds, and definitely a lot of CI builds. It's going to be very, very powerful. So let's get rid of Auxium and bring up, let's go Soultaker. Finally, we have an axe unique that is a one-handed axe unique that is worth using. It's always been a kind of an underrepresented slot in the uniques department. There's one good two-handed axe that's a unique, and then there's a couple ones that can be used for leveling, but this one we have now a one-handed endgame unique axe. Soultaker is pretty impressive. It has a lot of physical damage and ridiculously high attack speed. As you can see, 123 to 231 physical damage with 20% quality is very high, and 1.81 attacks per second on this one here. Very, very powerful. The cold resist is nothing to scoff at. I don't know what the range on that is, but I assume it's something like 20 to 30 or something like that, or maybe up to 25 or something like that, but still a nice little extra bit of resist. The next one is your physical damage can chill. Now this is a pretty interesting one. I like this. Basically, since, as I said earlier, status ailments are calculated off the damage inflicted, and usually chill is only calculated off cold damage, and cold damage is only a small percentage of your overall damage, unless you're, you know, playing like a cold caster or something like that. Now, but with this item and with builds that would be using it, you'd have very high physical damage, and that physical damage causes the chill status ailment. So that means you're going to be getting very long duration chills with this item, so that's pretty cool. And then the most interesting stat on this item is that melee attacks can't fail based on cost. So that means that attacks or skills that are melee attacks, when used with this weapon, will consume mana or life. However, if you get to 0 mana, and I'm not going to say 0 life, because if you get to 0 life you die. If you get to 0 mana, you can still use the skill. So effectively what this means is you can run a build that's reserving all of its mana, has any supplementary skills on blood magic skill gems, and then uses say your main attack uses 55 mana per attack, and you only have 24 mana left because you've got everything else reserved. You can still use that attack indefinitely. It's essentially a mana free attack. It has no cost. However, a funny downside to this is that you won't be able to use this with blood magic, because you will be able to kill, well, you can still if if you've set up your build right, but you can potentially kill yourself with blood magic with this item, because it will allow you to bypass the stop that's put in the game, where if you don't have enough blood health to use a skill, you won't be able to use it. But with this item, you will be able to use that, and you will be able to consume 100% of your life that's remaining and kill yourself. So don't like accidentally use this if you're on a low life build in hardcore or something like that, but that's pretty funny. But this is a very, very powerful axe, and we should be seeing some interesting builds that use that. Mana-based builds, fantastic, pretty exciting stuff. So it should be very good for things like physical cleave builds, cyclone builds, but it's also going to be pretty much best in slot item for any one-handed melee build that can use axes, basically. So very cool item, another best in slot from there. The next one we'll be bringing up is Blood Dance Sharkskin boots. These are level 44 boots, and they're themed like the base item, which is cool. The flavor text there has some Nice, nice references to sharks, since it's a Sharkskin boot. Pretty cool stuff. 32 dexterity, not really a big deal, kind of just a nice stat to have on there. 20% increased move speed obviously isn't max move speed, but often the case we see with items that have other ways of giving you move speed, you won't get the max move speed roll. Still, 20% is quite good. Now this item overall is very interesting because pretty much everything else on this item relates to frenzy charges. I really like uniques that interact with charges because charges themselves, at their base, aren't super interesting. It's I guess it's an interesting mechanic, but it's what you can do with them, with various items and passives and things that make charges really interesting. And this makes frenzy charges a lot more interesting. So basically, the first one is that you get life regen per frenzy charge, and this is probably the biggest one out of all of them. Basically, this gives you a max of 7% life regen if you have the full 7 frenzy charges. On the side of the passive skill tree that often gets very little life regen. So that's very good. It's balancing out the passive tree with specific builds that can use this item, and this is even more life regen than you can get with endurance charges as well, which is something like a maximum of it's like 0.2 per endurance charge, so not a huge amount. But this is 1% per frenzy charge, so very, very powerful. And with this, we should see the rise or the re-rise of life-based Righteous Fire builds. Because when the max resistances were reduced a while back, life-based Righteous Fire builds took a hit, and they weren't really very viable anymore. Sometimes you could sustain them with life leech, but not quite enough. But now with an extra 7% life regen potential using these particular boots, I think we might see some very powerful life-based Righteous Fire builds coming out of that. So that's pretty cool stuff. Next up, we have a kind of a 23% chance to gain Frenzy Charge when you kill an enemy, kind of like a weak version of Blood Frenzy, but without the Blood Rage, without the drawback of Chaos Damage. So that's a pretty nice one. It means you can essentially, you could probably create a build around this that doesn't have any other way of generating Frenzy Charges. If you're killing enough enemies, 23% chance is should be pretty easy to keep up full Frenzy Charges. I imagine so. It would probably require some testing. Next one is another interesting one. Enemies on low life take 3% increased damage per frenzy charge. It's kind of like a weak culling strike. Low life is, I believe, less than 30% life, so it'll be good against bosses and things, and it'll help you, I guess, off some enemies, but 3% increased damage per frenzy charge, not a huge amount, just a little bonus. Kind of a minor mod, it seems to me, but interesting nonetheless. And then you have increased move speed, as I said, which will balance out the 20% max on the actual boots themselves. 2% per frenzy charges, a max of 14%, so you can get higher than you can normally get on boots from this when you have full frenzy charges. So pretty cool. Nice go fast build with frenzy. I always like go fast builds. And then you have 3% reduced attack speed. So this is obviously a major drawback. Still, this is less of a reduction than what you get as a bonus from the frenzy charges themselves. So it means that frenzy charges aren't going to be quite as powerful for you in terms of attack speed, but they're still going to be it's still going to be a net increase in attack speed, so that's pretty good. Other than that, you don't have any life or resists on this item, but often is the case with boots. As long as you have your move speed and some other interesting good stats on there, there's quite a few good unique boots as well. Dropping some life and resists on this slot is okay if you can pick them up in other places. So pretty powerful item overall. I don't know if this is best in slot, but it's certainly going to enable some good things. And then the last thing, which is of course worth a mention, you get Gore Footprints on this item, which is one of the new microtransactions, which I will very, very briefly show off here for you guys. As you can see, very gory, and I believe it has like a bit of a squelching sound effect too, so that's pretty cool. And that's an expensive microtransaction as well, so if you want that microtransaction and you can't afford it but you play the game a lot, then that's a way to get it. I like that. That's pretty cool. Some people don't like that. I like that. Then the final item is Death's Oath Astral Plate. Now this is on the Astral Plate base, which is a good base item. Basically, it has less armor than like the Glorious Plate, for example, and a few other armor pieces, but it has 12% all resist implicit to the item. So that's a free 12% all resist, which is definitely nothing to scoff at. It very much balances out that armor, and a lot of people will go for this armor over the Glorious Plate, if they want to cap out their resistance a bit more easy. So that said though, this item also has 213% increased armor. Now I believe the max increased armor is actually, if I can find it here, is 176% I believe currently. So this still gets a crap ton of armor, 1587 on an item that's not qualityed is pretty ridiculous, and I don't actually know what the max roll for this is, or if this is max roll. It's probably not based on the arbitrary 13 there, so it can probably roll a bit higher. On top of that, you have 5% physical attack damage leached back as life, and some attack speed, or you know, damage dealing sort of things, and life leech on a chest. Two things that you can't normally get in this slot. Obviously, always very interesting. 42 all attributes. I don't know what the range on this is, but that is actually very, very powerful. That essentially will cover most of your need for skills, you know, attributes for skills, which is pretty good, especially if you're a strength stacking build and you're doing that. Or if for some reason you're going an ES or CI build, which I'll talk about in a little bit, the extra intelligence can help out a lot, and will maybe counteract the weakness of this. So, the next thing, these are the two interesting things here. Deals 450 chaos damage per second to nearby enemies. Now that is very powerful if you're on melee. It's 450 per second free DPS, obviously, per second DPS. 450 chaos damage free to enemies. Some enemies are chaos resistant, but those typically have very low life, so it's going to do quite a bit of damage to everything. And then the counterbalance to this is that you take 450 chaos damage per second for 10 seconds on kill. That's 4,500 damage per kill. Now this doesn't stack. I'm like 99% sure this doesn't stack, because that would be insane if it did. But this is very obviously something, a huge drawback for this item. It also has gore footprints. I'm just going to point that out before I continue. But the 400, that's such a huge drawback. Now this, whereas I said the other items were potentially best in slot items, this is a potentially best in slot item, but only for builds that can very specifically build for this. Now it might be possible to build life-based builds that can resist that through a lot of regeneration and life steal. You have life leech here on the item itself, but if you can pick that up in a few other places, and you know, I guess if you can, you know, set up your build in the right way to have enough life regen and life steal, you might be able to deal with that 4,500 chaos damage, but it's gonna be very difficult to deal with. So that counteracts the power in this item. However, there might be some niche uses for this in CI or ES builds. Now that sounds pretty crazy because this is an armor chest piece, and your biggest source of ES is from your chest piece. So that means you're gonna have a much lower ES pool overall. Now, it might be possible to do this, especially if you're like a one-handed build, a melee build with a shield, and a CI build. Now, I have very recently seen some life and CI builds that have very low life and ES totals. Like, I saw one as low as, like, lower than 1,000 life, but it was stacking ridiculous amounts of mitigation instead, very high resist and mitigation armor and charges and all that sort of stuff, and were able to survive in endgame content, which is pretty crazy. I think we might see a rise of this in the future. Now, if that is the case, we might see some CI builds with lower overall ES totals, who are obviously resistant to that chaos damage, which means they take away that big, drawback. But they get all of this crap ton of armor and some nice other stats to boot. So a very interesting item. Some very strong builds could come out of it, but I think it's going to be a while before they do. I don't know if this was a diamond inspired item or not. If it was, then I suspect the person who created it saw the potential for these low ES builds and is trying to create an item for a build that can take advantage of that. So pretty interesting stuff. Very interesting week in terms of new uniques for Path of Exile. If you guys want to, when a new patch comes out and you want to see the new uniques a bit more quickly when they come out, I might make more videos like this in the future because I enjoy talking about these items. But I believe, I've lost it. I'll put in the description a link to. There's a thread that these items are often posted to, not immediately, but usually within 24 hours, and you guys can check that out. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.